Hello, and welcome to episode 97 of Public Interest Podcast with your host, Jordan Cooper, where we interview politicians, activists, advocates, and others who seek to improve the state of the world. We're here today with Adam Levin, co-founder of Credit.com and author of Swiped, How to Protect Yourself in a World Full of Scammers, Phishers, and Identity Thieves. He is also chairman and founder of CyberScout, formerly known as Identity Theft 911. Adam, great to have you with us today.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Jordan. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So the first question I'd like to ask you is, what are you currently doing, or what have you ever done to advance the public interest, and why?
Well, I've done a number of things. I was Assistant Attorney General in the state of New Jersey. I was Consumer Affairs Commissioner for a number of years. I created Credit.com for the purpose of both education and advocacy in the credit area. I created Identity Theft 911 for the purpose of not only educating but protecting people when it came to issues relating to identity theft, as well as identity management programs, breach and breach response programs. And I wrote Swiped, and the purpose of Swiped was really to better educate people as to the threats that are out there, as well as the new way they should be looking at the world so they can not only protect themselves but actually be in a position to more effectively and quickly recover from incidents of identity theft.
So let's go back a little bit closer to the beginning of your career. You mentioned that you were the New Jersey Division of Consumer Affairs Director. How is it that you even came into that position? Is that eventually, obviously, there seems to be a logical path from there to protecting consumers online. But how did you originally even have an interest in advocating for consumers in the first place?
Well, I was very involved in all things public service related. When I was young, my family was both involved with public service and politics. I went to law school, but I went to law school to be a legislator, not to actually practice law per se. I thought it was very important, though, if you're going to pass legislation, to understand exactly how it works, how it can be a vehicle for things positive, as well as, unfortunately, it can also be something that creates a lot of difficulty for people if you're a legislator and you have no concept of the way it works. And unfortunately, I think there are a lot of people in public service that don't understand the ramifications of laws they pass or policies that they propose. So I got involved in politics at the federal level. I then, after I lost my first run for Congress in 1974, wanted to stay involved in public service, and I became a volunteer attorney at the New Jersey Division of Consumer Affairs. And the director, when she was elevated Commissioner of Banking, recommended to the governor that he appoint me because of the 2 years I spent working with her. And I was the first person actually ever appointed head of consumer affairs from within the agencies. And not only that, but I was the youngest consumer affairs director in the history of the state. So I was, in fact, perhaps the youngest person in the division. So I was a kid, but I was their kid. And so people were very protective of me. And we had a heck of a 5-year run. Was responsible for a lot of legislation and regulations, good things that protected people, not bad things that weighed down business. But I had a philosophy that you could be pro-consumer and not anti-business, that you could actually be pro-legitimate business and pro-consumer. And New Jersey Consumer Affairs is an interesting agency because at the time I was there, and it's even bigger now, it was one of the more powerful consumer protection agencies in the country in an era where consumer protection was really flourishing, and it was meaningful and important, and a lot of good things were done.
So, Mr. Levin, I want to just interject and make this concrete for our listeners. I believe when you were at the Division of Consumer Affairs in New Jersey, you actually were responsible for something relating to the recall of Firestone tires. You just mentioned a moment ago how you could both protect consumers and simultaneously protect businesses from other businesses' malfeasance. can you use the example of the Firestone story to illustrate for our listeners exactly how advocating for consumer safety and product safety had actually positive ramifications in the business community in New Jersey?
Well, sure. First of all, when you have a product that is arguably defective, and remember it was a voluntary recall, you have a situation where businesses are buying products, and those businesses could be harmed as much as consumers could be harmed. When you talk about things like, I'm a big fan of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and I think they're out there protecting legitimate business from those who are scammers and fraudsters as they are protecting consumers. And in the Firestone case, of course, it was a situation where tires were impacting people in our state, that several thousand people had incidents with their tires, and there were injuries and there were accidents, and no one could really figure out why. New Jersey and California led the effort. This was back in the late 70s, where we uncovered the fact that there was actually a defect in the way the tires were being produced, and that the tread would pull away and ultimately wrap around the axle, which would cause the car to lock and spin, and that's when you would have a lot of problems. So, again, when you find something that's an issue and you deal with it, it's very important, because everyone is a beneficiary of that. Even the manufacturer ultimately is a beneficiary, because if you get it fast enough and soon enough, you can end the problem early enough that you are actually better protecting everybody.
Did you receive any feedback from car dealerships or car manufacturers who say, look, I manufacture a Chrysler, a Ford, or a Toyota, and I don't want my car to be associated with an exploding tire? Or did you hear from consumer advocates that there were fewer incidents of accidents once a recall happened? Did you get that positive feedback, or did you not get much data on outcomes?
Oh, no, I got very positive feedback from an awful lot of people. I testified in Washington, and it turned out to be sort of a watershed moment. And, any time a situation like that occurs, it sets a standard, and it also, is a cautionary tale. People get a lot more careful. Businesses get more careful. Consumers look more closely at things. It's the concept of, you look at a situation and you say to yourself, to an individual, it may seem like an isolated incident, but it may not be. It may be part of a pattern, and that pattern could be extremely destructive. So therefore, the faster you get it, the more quickly you deal with it, the faster you get something off the road that may not be safe, the better for people. And that was also, the era of Ralph Nader in those days. So there was a lot of focus on product safety. I think and for
our listeners, Mr. Levin just referenced Ralph Nader, the author of a book called Unsafe at Any Speed, about essentially a certain type of car, I believe a Ford Pinto, that had an exploding gas tank that sheared off when you got in an accident. So, Mr. Levin, I do want to transition away from automobile safety and more towards advocating for consumers in the world of identity theft and financial advocacy. You have clearly spent a career advocating for consumers. You earned your stripes and earned a lot of credibility working for New Jersey. Can you talk about your transition into the world of identity theft and advocating for consumers in financial markets, and how that led to you founding Credit.com?
Well, actually, Credit.com was founded in 1993. In fact, we were founded so long ago that we managed to get the domain Credit.com by swapping a hard drive for it. As you know, obviously, but domains have become extremely valuable, and especially to get a domain that's the root is almost unheard of. So it was a very exciting time back then. And the purpose was really to write a book and do an infomercial. The decision, though, was made that infomercials, in order to be successful, oftentimes had to sound as if you were selling a used car. And credit is an extremely sensitive subject. It's an emotional subject for a lot of people. And so at that time, my collaborator and I, we decided that, we need to find another approach. And he said to me something that I will never forget. He said, there's this new thing called the Internet. I think it may work. It may be an incredible vehicle to sell products and services. And we have something invaluable, which is credit education, and understanding the way the American credit system works is invaluable for people. And we had a very different philosophy, and that was that, a lot of people looked at credit as an enemy, as something that was scary, as something that happened to them.
Right.
And this actually also transitions into the whole identity theft area, is that when you say the word portfolio, the Pavlovian response of most people is investments. But they don't realize that in our lives we also have a number of portfolios, two of the most important of which are your credit portfolio and your identity portfolio. And just as you would hope that a professional manager is managing your money and managing it wisely, when it comes to credit and identity, you have to be the professional manager of those portfolios. You have to build them, nurture them, manage them, and protect them. And no one has a greater interest in your financial security or your credit stability than you do. And no one knows better what you do and the way you do it than you do. And there's where education and protection really come in and become critical.
Now, does everybody – well, first of all, two-part question here. When we talk about identity portfolio, are we merely talking about an electronic identity portfolio that can be taken online? And the second question is, let's say, some of our listeners out there are not interested in having credit cards and don't take loans. Why would having a good credit score impact them? Why would they need to protect their credit portfolio? So those were two questions there.
Right. Well, but, when I talk about identity, I'm talking about all aspects of your identity. It's not just a question of online, because you can be impacted by things that happen offline to you in terms of your identity. It could be something like someone steals your garbage and finds sensitive documents in that garbage that then can be used as the basis for impersonating you. So you can have people who steal your mail. A lot of people, simply put their mail in their mailbox, put up the little flag and assume all is well, and don't realize that there are people who go through neighborhoods looking for mailboxes for the specific purpose of either stealing incoming or outgoing mail, understanding the fact that if you steal a bill, you're getting account information, you're getting personal information. If there's a check involved, you're getting a checking account number, you're getting a routing number, you're getting a lot of additional information. So there are, as we say, standard and nuclear versions of identity theft. But so it really is all aspects of your identity, including your reputation, because your reputation is definitely impacted. And when it comes to credit, you're talking about all aspects of credit. And the fact that a lot of people don't realize that your credit portfolio is a resume. It can also be a rap sheet. And whether you use credit per se or not, there are so many aspects of our lives that are impacted by credit. For instance, there are a lot of states in this country where people, when they apply for a job, employers pull their credit report as part of the job application evaluation process.
Is that legal?
And it is legal. There are certain states where they're saying that only in circumstances involving credit, where you're applying for a job that involves credit or money, that a credit report should be pulled. I know Senator Warren has introduced legislation in Washington to try to make it more of a national issue, that credit should be used only in connection with financial-related work as opposed to all jobs. But a significant percentage of employers still pull it. Now, they can't look at credit scores, but they can look at credit reports.
And what's the difference?
Well, the difference is a credit score is based on 5 elements. It's based on, do you pay on time? Do you use too much of your available credit? What is the length of your credit history? What is the mix of accounts you have? How many inquiries do you have? Where your credit report is, a full report on a variety of different aspects of which those elements may exist. So, but they can't use a score. They have to use a report if they're going to do that.
Just to recapitulate what you said, the credit score cannot be used by potential employers, and that contains 5 specific data elements. And a data report they could use, and that contains more data elements, which may or may not include the 5 elements in the credit score. Is that correct?
Well, all of those elements will be there in your credit report, but you're not being graded on a scoring model. It's just the report. Mm-hmm. These are your accounts. This is your payment history. Obviously, one can determine the length of your credit history. They can determine your increase. All these elements are there, but one is a number, an algorithm, where the other is the full report. Now, some people say, well, people look at a credit report to determine if you're a good manager of your finances. I think it's more than that. It's really how aware you are of your situation. So it's not just, are you a good manager? Because there could be things on your credit report that have nothing to do with your financial management skills. For instance, medical debt. Mm-hmm. Things happen. People get debt. Right. Medical debt can be because of a miscommunication between an insurance company and a medical provider. There are a lot of reasons why there could be issues on your credit report that don't relate to just your ability to manage things. You lose your job. You could then have an issue with paying your bills. So as a result, it's all different kinds of things.
I would like to, I'd like to move on to your new book, but before we do, just to give some context to our listeners, it sounds like you have to protect your credit and identity portfolios in addition to your financial portfolio. You have to manage your credit and identity portfolios. And the reason is because from identity theft. There are thieves out there who are motivated, who somehow derive value and profit from the use of or sale of your own information. For many listeners out there, that may be perplexing. Why would somebody be interested in my water utility bill? Or why would somebody be interested in some other bit of information about me? Can you take a moment to elucidate for listeners exactly why anyone would want this information and how they can use it?
Well, first of all, legitimate businesses want the information because they want to be able to market things to you. Identity thieves want the information because they wish to exploit you for their own benefit. So they will do everything from open new accounts in your name, get medical treatment prescriptions, have examinations with you based on your insurance or based on just using your information, and then you end up getting a bill for something that has nothing to do with you. People want to get their hands on your information for the purpose of filing fake tax returns and then getting refunds that should have been your refund. I mean, it has cost the U.S. Treasury billions of dollars. It is an enormous issue, identity-related tax fraud. You have child identity theft, where people get the information from children and use it to either open accounts, get medical treatment, commit crimes, file fake tax returns, get mortgages on properties, mixing information from different people up and creating what I call a bionic person, because it's tougher to track it, and the breadcrumbs lead to so many different directions, it becomes more difficult for anyone to determine that there really has been a problem. So there are a lot of contributing factors as to why someone would want it, but one of the most important things people have to realize, we all have day jobs. We have lives. We work. We have families. We take vacations. We do things. An identity thief is preying on the fact that while we are doing those things, we may not be paying specific attention to our data, where it is, what's going on with it, what's happening. So we have day jobs, but to an identity thief, we are their day job. So we have a formidable opponent out there.
And you wrote a book, Swiped, How to Protect Yourself in a World Full of Scammers, Phishers, and Identity Thieves, about what these thieves are doing and what their job is and how they put us all at risk. What is this book about, and why did you write it?
The book is really based on the theory that, and it's not something that a lot of people want to hear, but it's the reality of it, and that is that it is inevitable because of how much data that's out there right now, because of breaches, hacking, because people fling staggering amounts of information into cyberspace about themselves through social networking. People get phished, where they give up information because they're responding to emails or texts or phone calls that appear to be coming from somebody legitimate that aren't. But there's so much information out there, it's inevitable that each and every one of us is going to become a victim of some form or multiple forms of identity theft many times during our lives. Breaches have become the third certainty in life. So the book really talks about what I call the 3 M's. How do you minimize your risk of exposure? How do you monitor? And how do you manage the damage in the event that you become a victim? Because let's say you do everything right in the process of trying to minimize your exposure. If you're on the wrong database at the wrong moment and the wrong person gains unauthorized access, and your information is on that database, and in particular your Social Security number, you're going to be looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life.
Pretty scary thought. Well, as we near the end of a podcast here, I'd like to lighten it up for a moment, bring us back to the beginning of the episode real quick, and then ask another follow-up question after that. So you mentioned that you went to law school. You had an interest in public service. You were interested in running for elected office, which you subsequently did. And you went to law school in order to better prepare yourself to advocate for the public interest as an elected official. Now, not having won elected office to date, how would you reflect upon the experience of law school? Was it worth it?
Well, of course, you know the old thing about the first year you're scared to death, the second year you're worked to death, the third year you're bored to death. That's why actually I ran for Congress as I was a third-year law student. I commuted between Ann Arbor, Michigan, and Union County, New Jersey. Won a primary, lost the general, ended up head of consumer affairs, and then ran again 8 years later, lost a close one again to the same guy who wasn't supposed to be there. But law school was a fascinating experience. The key thing about law school is it really sharpens your analytical skills. And it's so important to have as analytical a mind as possible to be able to look at things and evaluate things. And, you know, you evaluate them on a number of levels. Obviously, people evaluate things emotionally, but also it's important to look at things analytically and sort of do cost-benefit analysis on things and determine, you know, if I make this decision, what are going to be the ramifications of the decision? And so often you see in public life arguments raised about the fact that unintended consequences, and then what are the unintended consequences of unintended consequences? And law school really helps you think about it. And the thing about law school is you're trained to be able to argue any side of the issue. So theoretically, if you're arguing or able to argue any side of the issue, that means you're actually able to look at all sides of an issue and then come to a conclusion as to what you may think is the best argument to make and the right side of the issue. But there are a lot of people that will tell you there's no right side to any particular issue. I don't particularly agree with that, but it's very important to understand what all the arguments are so that you can both counter them and strengthen your arguments.
Thank you. That's particularly helpful because a number of our listeners are actually undergraduates who are being accessed through their university career services centers, and they're considering what career paths to follow. The last question I'd like to ask.
If I could just give you two observations. One is I had a a professor that particularly impacted me when I was in law school. He was my constitutional law professor for undergraduate. And I always said to him, why are you tougher on the guys that get it right than those that don't get it right? The answer. And his response was, because in life it's not necessarily about getting it right or wrong. It's about being able to defend it. And, of course, if I were also giving career advice, it's one word, like in the movie Graduate, they said plastics. My word is cybersecurity, because that is an enormous job opportunity in the future for young people, all people, but young people, because we are looking at the possibility of a 2 million person gap between what we need by 2025 and the trained personnel to actually fill the jobs that need to be filled by 2025 in cybersecurity.
And to segue off that and to conclude the podcast, the final question I'd like to ask you is to reflect upon your years advocating for consumers, whether it be as a candidate, whether it be as first a volunteer, and then amazingly having been promoted from a volunteer to being director of a division of consumer affairs, to really getting involved as consumer advocacy in the financial world. Why is it that you've chosen this path? Why is it that it's so important to you to advocate for consumers, and what do you hope to, at the end of your career, have accomplished throughout the course of your career in public service?
Well, I sincerely hope, the purpose of the companies that I have created has really been sort of it's public-private, in the sense that to do good and do well. And I think that the problem is the public finds itself in many, and we certainly see it in the results in the last election, the outrage, the anger, where the public has basically said that we as members of the public have been taken advantage of, that people have used sort of leverage based on where they are versus where we are to do things, and we want to see things change. And so often in public service you hear about how things are going to change. They haven't, really. That we see gridlock. I mean, in Washington, we have Congress that can't seem to agree on the day of the week in the past few years, or people that go to Washington specifically to make things not happen as opposed to happen because they're so angry at what had been happening. So at the end of my career, if I can feel like I have contributed to education, to a better understanding of the way the system works, to try to improve things in the system, the credit system, to have a better understanding of what credit scores mean, how to better protect yourself when it comes to identity theft, how to understand that you can make a difference, that each and every one of us in our own way contributes. For those who say, well, if I vote, it's not going to mean anything, look at this past election and tell me that it doesn't mean something. It may not have turned out the way people may have wanted it to turn out from their particular perspective, but clearly no one can say my vote didn't necessarily count. I live in a small state, and yes, it did count. So it's one of those things where we all are parts of a system. It's going to happen with us or without us, and isn't it better that we actually contribute to try to make it come out our way?
And that has been Adam Levin, co-founder of Credit.com, author of Swiped, How to Protect Yourself in a World Full of Scammers, Phishers, and Identity Thieves. Also the chairman and founder of CyberScout, formerly known as Identity Theft 911. Mr. Levin speaks about a career in consumer advocacy where he tries to raise awareness about the many myriad ways in which consumers are being taken advantage of for individual profit by criminals and by individuals who are legitimate businesses but against whom you must be aware. For instance, potential employers are legitimate, but they may be reviewing your credit and identity portfolios, Mr. Levin has said. So for him, working to advance the public interest is a calling that has taken many forms, from being as part of a state government, being a candidate for elected office, and ultimately as an entrepreneur in various private and public partnerships and endeavors. He's someone who seeks to make sure that at the end of the day, consumers' voices are heard, are enfranchised, and are given agency in a world of increasing complexity. And in that case, Mr. Levin feels as though he has done his job in helping consumers. So thank you so much, Mr. Levin, for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
And this has been episode 97 of Public Interest Podcast with your host, Jordan Cooper, where we interview politicians, activists, advocates, and others who seek to improve the world. Thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time.